Thank you. Yes, they asked me to kind of talk a little bit about writing m.reddit.com. So first of all, how many of you are Redditors in here and will actually admit it? Some of you won't, that's okay. Yeah, it's an interesting place right now. It reminds me of like the Monty Python to the silly place, we won't go there right now. But yeah, they asked me to talk about my experience writing m.reddit.com. So let's just dive right into it. Why is writing React different for the mobile web? It's not, really. So that's the end of my talk. So. Just kidding. Perf is different. Perf is really, really, really important on the web. That's why I said it's on the slide. I'm sure you're all here, so you probably all know that, but you have limited constraints, you have limited battery, you have limited signal. There's just a whole bunch of things that change when you're writing React, writing JavaScript, writing anything for a phone or a tablet or anything that's going to be battery powered. So hence I have retitled my talk, Writing Performance React, because that's really the only thing that really matters when you're writing that's different, I suppose. So yeah, perf matters. Like it matters a lot. Because you have to deal with data speeds, right? Like how fast it can actually load your code onto your client. How much it costs. Like she said, I just came back from China, and in China my data plan was really expensive. So I just was cursing everybody. It's like, you are literally costing me dollars when I visit your website. Literally, like I was paying like $25 for every 100 megs. It's crazy. Battery drain, which was also a problem because, as you might have guessed, I don't speak Chinese, right? So I have to use Google Translate for everything. And Google Maps, which doesn't work super well where I was, but now this is turning into a 45-minute rant. Bad user experience, right? Because if you try and go and scroll and it's just like janking down, like people are gonna leave. Like I know I do. And longer load times means you're making less effing money. So like that should be a problem. That should be just like sirens in the back of your head. Like there's just a million studies that corroborate this. Like I used to work on Reddit's marketplace platform, which many of you probably never knew existed and no longer exists, so it doesn't matter. But I used to work on that, and there's just 1,000 studies that say the longer it takes your page to load, the less stuff people are going to buy. So longer load times is less money. So how many of you know this beautiful gentleman? His name's Paul Irish, works for Google. He's the Chrome Developer Relations Manager, some fancy title like that. He filed a ticket on the Reddit mobile repo. Reddit mobile is totally open source, so if you want to dig in and see just the train wreck of code that it is, partially my fault, not totally. So I can't take all the blame / credit for that. He filed this ticket on GitHub that is just super long, super thorough, super detailed. I actually had written an entirely different talk for this period, and after he filed this ticket, I went through and I was like, this is way better than all the shit I was going to say, so let's just talk about this instead. So that's mostly what we're going to be talking about. It's going to get kind of technical, so I guess that'd be a good demographic to figure out. How many of you in here are like developers writing code on the day-to-day? Okay, designers? Businesses? People? I see you. So this is going to get kind of technical, so I apologize, like sorry, not sorry kind of thing. So anyway, one day Paul Irish says at Reddit, hey Reddit, your mobile performance is really bad. Reddit's like shit. I don't know what I'm gonna do about that. So let's just talk about some general perf tips. Like this is just not React specific. This is just performance tips in general for writing good JavaScript for the mobile web. Because if you don't nail this stuff, everything I'm going to talk about that's React specific is just totally and completely irrelevant, right? Because like what I'm going to show you afterwards is going to get you like this much gain, these things are going to get you like this much gain. So it's super important that you nail these first. And they're kind of in order, I think. I'll tell you if they're out of order. Also, if you have any questions while I'm going along here, just yell them out, raise your hand, throw things, yell, scream. Obscenities, that's all welcome. Okay, so stop using so many goddamn images, especially designers in the room. Like this is like 90% of your page load is going to be these just giant images, right? Like I remember I used to work on Reddit Made. Does anyone here know what Reddit Made is? I didn't think so. Reddit also used to have like a Kickstarter type platform. Bet you that's a surprise for most of you. It's also dead. So now that I'm going through all these projects that I used to work on and are now dead, this is not boding well. So Netflix is not dying, as far as I know. So yeah, Reddit Made, we used to load all these images, and the page load would be like 7 megabytes, 10 megabytes, 12 megabytes, and it was just all these crazy images we were loading. So one, we were loading way too many images, and two, like they were not optimized. If you're not optimizing your images, you're breaking the internet. Like this is totally your fault. Like you're costing people money, you're costing yourself money, and you're just making people sad. So this is like a public shaming for all of you out there. So please, please, please run all your images through like, PNG Crush and all those wonderful things that just take the same thing, it looks exactly the same, just strips out a whole bunch of crap. Like it's just free. It's free performance. Free. I'm just gonna say it again to make sure you it's just totally free. Okay, got it? It's free. Okay. So, next thing. This is one of those things that it's like one of the 3 hard problems in computer science. Ever heard that, any of them? There's 3 things that are hard in computer science: caching, cache validation, and off by 1 errors. It's kind of one of those things. So cache images as long as possible. This makes sense. Your images typically shouldn't be changing very much. Like if an image is called like mylogo.png, hopefully next time you load mylogo.png, it's not changing every single time. Like we don't have too many dynamic images for any given packet. The browser is smart enough. It's like, oh hey, this person visits this page twice a day, or if it's Reddit, like 9 times a day. I'm not going to re-download this every single time. I'm just going to keep it in the cache. And so you send along with it like a cache header said, please keep this alive for X amount of time. Well, images should just survive a really, really, really long time. And then consider separating your scripts and styles that change. So like for example, you're not changing React, or I really hope you're not changing React's core source code. So again, the browser is smart enough to cache that. So if you separate all of your vendor scripts like Bootstrap, React, Angular, jQuery, all that stuff, into a separate just vendor bundle and send it out there and just have it like never invalidate. Great, it'll just sit in their browser. Next time they visit your site, they no longer have to load it. Whereas if you're bundling React and bundling all that stuff into like one single package, anytime you make one little change to your JavaScript, it's invalidating this entire bundle. Yeah. So consider doing that. It's kind of a pain. It means you have 2 dynamic packages that you have to load. Kind of a pain. But worth it, right? Right. So, and then using naming conventions to invalidate data. This is kind of a, hopefully will not sound unfamiliar to you. You'll like name an image. Like, this is my logo.png, or my logo 1234.png. And then you cache it forever, right? And then if you do eventually have to invalidate it, you can call it mylogo1235.png. And lo and behold, the browser's like, oh, I've never seen this before. Now I can load it. So this, just like these first 2 things, again, this is like 90%. Like I should probably just spend the rest of my talk just like going back and forth between these 2 slides, because if that's all you do, like we're fixing the internet. Making people happy, making money, like it's just what we all need to do. Any questions about that so far? Hopefully it's like, yeah, this is totally like elementary stuff. I already do this. You're an idiot. Sit down. Okay. Okay. So don't use a web font and tell your designer to F off. They tell you to. I'm serious. How many designers in here have told their developers to put in a web font? Go, good, no hands up, it's like, get out. Just leave, just pack your shit up and go. just don't. Like, I don't, like, there's plenty of pretty looking fonts on everyone's laptop that you can just load. Like, it doesn't have to be Helvetica or Arial or like, goddamn Comic Sans, I don't really care, right? But like, there's no reason to go and like load Open Sans for your pretty website. Like, it's not that different. And like, it's just like a ton of data. Like, this is, again, we're just wasting people's time and money and data, and it's just the worst. Like, you're just the worst if you do that. Yeah. Yeah, no, please.
So when you say, like, are you talking about your app? Because sometimes with Google Fonts, you can download it locally and then host it as, as part of the rest of your product, like your static server or whatever.
Yeah.
It's cached too.
It is cached. So what she's saying is that you can download like Google Web Font stuff, load as part of your assets and send it down, right? Is that?
Yeah. So then it wouldn't be as much of a loading issue or...
So it's still the same loading issue because it exists out on a server and the client has to pull it down. Whereas if like it's something like Arial, it doesn't have to be Arial, but everyone knows that's on every computer. Your phone will just load it up from its, like, on the phone, right? It's already on the phone. So it doesn't have to...
Cached is just that one time, right, though, for...
So, I mean, the first time they load your website, they'll have to download it, and then if you cache it forever, then yeah, then it's loaded forever. But the first time someone visits your website, they still have to download it. And then, like, you're opening the can of worms that, like, maybe we'll change the web font in the future, right? And it's still data downloading. So you can, I mean, obviously, many people disagree with me about this, and you're welcome to disagree with me, but, I mean, you're welcome to be wrong about it, too, so just kidding. Kind of. So icon fonts are just the worst, too. Like, they're not accessible, right? Like, that's probably my biggest complaint about them, as opposed to the data size, right? But you have, like, these icons that, like, how do you represent the hamburger icon to a blind person? Like, my friend over there from Yahoo, I went to their accessibility lab. They literally called it the Burger King icon to blind people. It's like, okay, like, they're like scrolling through with their voiceover things like, and you're on the Burger King icon. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what is the burger? Like, do I get like a Whopper if I press it? Like, so yeah, like they're the worst in that sense. That you're like messing up the internet for like other people, for blind people, or other people that are having issues kind of navigating a site other than the ways that you would typically intend. So you're slowing down your website to make it less accessible. Like this is the sum of what's happening here. You're downloading these icon fonts to make your site less accessible. And I mean, this is not totally true. There are other, perhaps more valid uses for them, but like I think you're better off for the most part just not trying to go there. Yeah.
Don't you want to use icon fonts so that you don't have to download these images?
Yeah. So you're saying that. You want to use these icon fonts so you don't download all these images, which will be bigger if you have to download all these different images. And I guess kind of what I'm trying to get at is like we should probably, for the most part, get away from icons in general because they're typically not very accessible. Now, if you have the choice of doing it between images and doing it an icon font, yeah, go ahead and go with the font, the icon font. And that's fine, but just make sure that it's accessible. Make sure that a blind person going through your website is not losing any meaning by going over these icons. Like this should be a really important consideration of when you're using icons.
What about sprites?
So sprite sheets, that's also a good question. Sprite sheets, if you don't know, like say I have like 50 little image icons, I'll put them all right next to each other on one image. And this is kind of a hack to save bandwidth so that you're not downloading 50 small images, you're just downloading just one big one. I should talk about it a little bit later in my slides. It's a good thing to do if you, again, if you're going to use icons, but again, they're not typically super accessible.
But you can still put the alternative text on each one, even though you're doing the same image.
Definitely, and you can individualize the alt text to say like this is what this icon is. Yeah. So, yeah, all good points. So there probably is a space for them, but I guess my summation of this point is we're slowing down the internet to just this piece of shit. Like, it just doesn't mean anything, right? Like, good job. Like, you slow down the internet for that. So, file size. These other ones that I've been talking about are a little bit more disputed, but like this one's just indisputable. Like, we need to make our file sizes smaller. Like, again, having just gone to China, like, I just got my data bill back. It's like $200, right? And I wasn't checking Facebook, I wasn't checking Instagram. Like, I was using Google Maps, Uber, and checking my email occasionally. So we just need to cut down on file sizes. So only include polyfills that, particularly with Babel. If you're familiar with Babel.js, it's what we're using right now to translate the future version of JavaScript to the current version of JavaScript. So only include the polyfills that you need right now. So, like, for example, if you never use like ES6 generators, which is like a really, really big feature that requires a lot of code to get it to work, then just leave out that polyfill. And like if you're using Lodash /_ something like that, just include the methods that you need. Like, they're built in such a way that you can include only the parts of the code that you need, and you can leave out the rest. And just like don't use jQuery at all. Like, that's another easy one. Like 90% of what you do with jQuery can just be done with a normal browser, and it doesn't even take that much code. You're just it's like your little like safety blanket that we still cling on to. And then deduplicate your dependencies. Like, for example, we'll talking about Lodash. Lots of other packages depend on Lodash, so just include it once instead of having each package include a copy of Lodash, because Lodash is huge. So, questions about that? Critical rendering path, hopefully this is not a new term to you. So like say I'm going to Amazon.com, right? Like, I hold up my phone, Amazon.com, and then I need it to immediately pop up like something, right? Like, this is a psychology game. Well, I could put that right there. You want people to perceive that your website is just instantly there, right? Even if it doesn't work yet, you want them to think that it works. And like, by the time they see it, they process it, like, oh, this is a really crappy Amazon Prime Day ad, and it was awful. I didn't even buy anything I wanted to. Like, by the time that they process that, then you want your code to start working, right? And by the time they're ready to go and interact with it, but you want them to actually see it and start processing it before it's actually ready to be interacted with. This is called the critical rendering path, right? Everything underneath the fold, right, you don't care about because they can't see it. So, yeah, you need to figure out like what's above the fold, what can they see, and then get that to show up first, and then defer everything else to be loaded after your critical rendering path. However, and this is actually a big problem that mobile m.reddit.com had, is as soon as you get that critical rendering path like down, then you just need to like hurry and scramble, like, oh crap, now everything else has to load real quick, right? And you start throwing everything on, like images in particular, you just start loading them just like right away. Now, hopefully you're cutting down on all this stuff so it's not that much to load, which was not how m.reddit.com was written, but you should write your apps that way. Yeah, super important. Like, again, this is a big like psychology move for your site. People think that it's like really responsive. Yeah.
So what does this look like in code? I know that part of it is moving your JavaScript down to the bottom of the page, but what are some other things in code that you can do to enhance this critical rendering path?
Yeah. So what are some things that you can do to like achieve this critical rendering path? Yeah. Good question. One of the things that you can do is, like, typically we load all of our CSS like separately, right? We load it in like the head somehow. Well, something that you can do is you can actually just put like a style tag like this. I know this sounds bad, but hear me out for just a second. You put a style tag on the top of your page that has just the most important CSS, like just the stuff to get the top looking good. And then everything else you put in a CSS file that you then asynchronously load, and you don't put it in your head. Because like you don't care when that is, well, you do care, but you care that it doesn't hit immediately, you want it to hit a little bit afterwards. So you'll asynchronously load your CSS probably using JavaScript. That's like the easiest and biggest win. The other one is like You'll just load the images that you need, and then again, all the rest of those images will be loaded later via JavaScript. Now, something you're probably thinking with that is like, well, what happens if they have JavaScript turned off? What happens if the JavaScript doesn't load correctly? Kind of this kind of progressive, excuse me, some of this progressive enhancement ideology. And you have to kind of find a balance, right? I think the way that we ended up doing it with m.reddit.com was we detect like right up front if you're using JavaScript or not, and if you're not, then we do just give you the whole page completely rendered in. It's like, sorry, like we tried our best to give you kind of this snappy experience, but your old phone or old laptop's not going to support it. So that requires some bifurcation of the code, which is not ideal, but you're still going for the fastest performance. So that kind of answer your question, though?
Yeah.
Cool. Other questions? There's lots of tricks for this. Probably a lot of them that I'm not even really familiar with, but the CSS one's definitely probably the most famous one. Cool. Animations. This is a huge problem with m.reddit.com because there's a front-end developer on staff over there that is just like the king of animations. Like he makes stuff that just looks amazing. However, there's so much going on, and we have so many icons that were animated that they just started like kind of really tying up the main thread with JavaScript. And JavaScript being single-threaded, it's really easy to tie up that main thread. JavaScript animations are amazing. Like they can be much better than CSS animations just because they're so flexible and they can be more performant. However, they are only performant if the main thread is idle / not totally occupied trying to render the rest of your crap. So, and they're hard to do well and they're hard to make accessible, right? Like again, like how do you communicate to a blind person the animations happening on your page? I mean, I haven't figured it out. I'm not saying that there isn't ways. And sometimes, you know, it's not totally important, but you certainly don't want them to lose meaning. Like maybe they can lose style, but you don't want them to lose meaning / content. So use sparingly, use them like appropriately. CSS animations can be better because you can shift them onto a different thread, particularly if you throw it on the GPU. If you've ever heard the translate Z hack for CSS, you can say translate Z 0. Doesn't do anything, right? Because you're not actually moving it anywhere in the Z axis, but because you're using that particular property, now it's going to throw whatever animations you are doing onto the GPU, which, you know, typically your browser is not tapping into the GPU that much, so that it just has infinite amounts of resources available to you. So, something to consider if you are doing it. If you are doing CSS animations, go ahead and see if you can involve the GPU and move some stuff off the main thread there. And again, animations, particularly like really heavy ones, are just going to burn battery, which is a big consideration. Like if someone's, like if you're having a Black Friday sale on your website, you want someone that has 5% on your 5% battery on their phone to be able to buy their stuff, right? Like, and if you're doing like all sorts of like, it's fireworks, it's 4th of July, like this is such an exciting sale, like, oh, and my phone's dead. Thank you, right? Like it's not exactly ideal. Any questions about that? Comments? All right. So this kind of covered like my main, like that's the stuff you really need to get down first before you start kind of fine-tuning your React. How many people here are actually coding right now in React? Like, whatever they're doing. Okay, got like 2. How many have like touched it, like done something with it? Okay, and how many are just like, what the hell is React? Any of those? Okay, that's fine. So like, I'll just give you a brief overview of what React is. React is an open source project that came out of Facebook. I believe now almost all of Facebook is built on it. Certainly all of Instagram is built on it. And it's kind of a new paradigm shift in JavaScript frameworks. It makes writing UI-oriented code really simple. And it's really performant, it does really well, however there are, 1, easy ways to mess up, and 2, it's not actually the reason why you use React. Like, it's performant so you can use it. But just because it is performant doesn't mean you need to use it. What they really pioneered was this idea of unidirectional data flow, the data, like you have these parent components and data flows down to child components, but it doesn't flow back up. And that restriction makes it very easy to find bugs, because if I have a problem here, I know that the only place that problem can be is in it or its subtree of children, right? Or if it's a data problem, it can only have come from the parent, right? And so you have these kind of limited areas where bugs can be. And as any developer can tell you, if you know where a bug is, like you know like the limited area it can be, like it dramatically cuts down time to find it. And this is why React is awesome, and this is why like I've wholeheartedly endorsed and used React. I was actually the one that introduced it to Reddit, and it was why I was hired at Netflix, is because Netflix is really switching hard to using React. Let's talk a little bit about React-specific tips. This is kind of the classic one. This is the classic React performance technique. React components have lifecycle methods. Basically, I'm about to be created, I am now created, and I am now on the page, okay, now I'm about to die, and now I have died, right? Like, kind of this life cycle of what happens to a React component on the page. They have this one called should component update. And that's basically React is going to ask this component, is like, hey, I got new data. Does this new data affect you? And if it does, like, then I need to re-update. If it doesn't affect you, then I can just leave you the way you are, right? Kind of, it seems like a simple concept. For the most part, you don't have to care, because usually React is fast enough that it doesn't matter. Like, you can run that a bunch of times on a bunch of components, and it's fast enough to not even have to worry too much about. However, the two kind of edge cases to that, I would say, is one, if you have like an icon, for example, like that you made out of an SVG or something like that, that's a React component, it's never going to update, right? Like it's not bound by data, it's just a component. So every time that the call should component update, you're just going to say, no, I have no data that I react to, so please never update me. So you just return false, never updates, and then it's just even more fast to get through that. Okay? The other one is when you find you have a bottleneck in your app, right? That's something like something's trying to re-render and it's trying to figure out if it should update and it needs to ask it a million times to a million different components. In this particular case, then you probably want to go in and say, okay, well, it only reacts to this small subset of data, so it doesn't have to go through its entire state to say, okay, what's going on here? Are there props here that are changing? Are there state here that's changing? And so you say, okay, I only react to these things. And then that'll give you a big performance boost. And then for other components, like things that do react to updates sometimes, but like you only have like 5 of them, or it's not a big deal, then I say just leave it, because it introduces weird bugs. And like that's one of the reasons that we chose React in the first place, is because it's really easy to debug. So for the most part, just leave it alone unless it's either a performance bottleneck or you know it's never going to change. Questions about that? This is, again, the biggest React-specific performance win. So React has some perf tooling, performance tooling, that you throw in basically some timer events, and React will tell you what's happening in your app. So print inclusive is going to include lifecycle methods, which is ones we were just talking about. Print exclusive is going to exclude those. And then print wasted is just time and battery that you are wasting. Like that's the stuff you need to look at, is like what am I doing here? In fact, I have one for mobile, reddit.mobile, m.reddit.com rather. So you can see that one at the top, it's literally just wasting 16 seconds. It's like, that nothing good is happening there. It is just wasting time. Now, you're always going to have some wasted cycles. Like it's an inevitable part of writing React. However, like we can look there at, let's see, like vote mobile button. Like that's just an icon, right? It's asking like, hey, should I update? Should I update? Like, what, 50 times? Like it just reminds me like a little Pomeranian, just like, should I update? Should I update? Right? Then you just like muzzle your little Pomeranian. It's like, no, you should never update. Now, this guy took a weird turn. I don't like my analogy anymore. So anyway, on like comments, like on these icon things, like you should just say like, please never update. right? And then you'll just totally cut that out. You can cut down the 16 seconds to be like 200 milliseconds, maybe at most, right? Because it's literally just wasted time on the main thread. Really, really useful if you're going to write any sort of like big React app. Like this should be a big part of like what you're doing. Yeah.
Does that happen automatically if it explicitly say,
Like the timings.
since that component doesn't have anything that is being rendered, and React to figure out how it needs to be rendered?
No, React is not that smart. Like it's going back to. So his question is React smart enough just to figure out that those things never update? It has these should component update.
So that's a check.
It's always going to check still. Yeah, and like it does a bunch of things. Just like it's not like Angular where you like what Angular does is it's called dirty checking, and it basically says I have this number 5. Okay, check again. Is it still 5? Is it still 5? And like that's how Angular is checking. What React is actually doing is like, hey, re-render your like destroy everything and then re-render and see if it's the same. And it's not smart enough to say, well, I've done this 7,000 times. I'm not going to do it anymore because on 7,002 it is going to re-render. So that's why these should component updates are really important. So really what this graph is telling you is like, where do I need to go look for a should component update? Which is a good point I hadn't thought of, so thank you for asking me that question. Any other questions? You do have to do this tooling yourself. You do have to put in like, hey, like, I'm starting my re-render, I'm stopping my re-render. Like it's not free, but it is worth it for sure. Okay, render fewer items. Let's see, okay, I got that. Render fewer items. Reddit definitely has this problem right now, and Facebook had it. Basically, the idea is like if you go to Reddit, like it's a feed of different items, right? A feed of different posts. However, you really only care about like the top 5 when you first load the page because that's all you can see. We're going back to our critical rendering path idea here, or at least a similar line of thinking. So if I only have 5, then I don't need to render all 50 at the same time, right? I can render the first 5, and then I can defer the rendering of the next 45 to later. Or if they never scroll down, I don't have to ever render like the last 5, right? Maybe. So the idea here is you're only going to render what you need to see the page. This requires like some forethought, right? Like because scrolling can get real weird if you're trying to scroll down and it's constantly adding stuff on the bottom, right? So some things to be careful of there. And one that I haven't totally figured out yet, to be truly honest about that. But yeah, by rendering only the feed items visible on the page, you save React a significant amount of time of asking, should I update, right? So that's really important. And Facebook just figured this out, so that's how Facebook is doing it now. And like hidden menus and actions, like if you have one of those stupid hamburgers, which Reddit does, by the way, and you click it, right? You don't need to actually have rendered the hidden menu yet. You don't need to render it until they actually click the hamburger. So like these kind of hidden menus, hidden actions, like modals, right? Don't render them until you actually need them. Pretty straightforward thing, yeah? In fact, there's a good quote from Jordan Walk, who's one of the core developers on React. He said, the amount of data you have should remain independent of the amount of data that you're rendering, right? Which I think is kind of insightful. That just because you can render it, because you have the data to do it, doesn't mean you need to do it right away. I borrowed this term from someone on Twitter. I should probably go figure out what his name is. He said one of the things that you should do with React is make sure you're drawing in the lines. And when I say drawing in the lines, just really like you should be writing React for React. In fact, I think that's what my next slide is called, React for React. So one stuff I'm using these lifecycle methods, right? Like you can do lots of weird things with them, but I would, like your lifecycle method should be just setting things up and tearing them down for the most part. I mean, there's some hackiness that may have to go on the side, but as much as you can avoid it. Use reps only when you have to, and this is coming for people that come from like a jQuery background, where you're used to the very imperative, like I have a DOM element on the page, and I want to do this to this DOM element, right? It's a very jQuery-like way of thinking. React is a totally different paradigm where objects that are on the DOM are ephemeral. They are rendered and then they're destroyed and then they're rendered, and you can never depend they're going to be there. So there's this idea of a ref that you can pull them out and say, okay, well, now I know I can get this, but don't, right? Usually there's a way to do it within React. You don't have to grab a ref. Refs are there, they're like a safety hatch. There's nothing else you can do, right? So just be careful about that. And when you do have to do things with like refs or listening to DOM events, just make sure that you're cleaning up after yourself, because you get really nasty memory leaks if you're not cleaning up after yourself. Really bad type things. I did some of those at Reddit. In fact, I think there is still one on there. I should find it. Okay, so React for React. And when I say React for React, I mean in the sense of like Pythonic Python, that is just like idiomatic React. Just be careful you're sticking on state. State should be checking mutable data, like that's it. Don't be sticking like big objects on there. Don't be sticking on anything that you want to track. Like you can stick on some sort of static object. Just leave stuff off that's not mutable data that your app is going to react to. Like that's all this state should be. And just be careful that there is a point where you're breaking things in too small of components, because like these calls aren't free. Like they're pretty close to free, but if you're rendering hundreds of them, they are no longer free. So like, for example, if you have like a text link that has a certain amount of styles associated with it, just make it an A tag that has a CSS class and call it a day, right? Like it doesn't have to be its own component. Questions about that? Webpack, this is another way to kind of like, this is where we're getting down closer and closer to like micro optimization. So like, if you're nailing everything so far, then like, let's keep going forward and try and get like our render time to like 200 milliseconds or something like that, something crazy. Webpack can break your app into chunks, which is like a crazy thing to me. Like, I don't understand how it works. And like, I tried to read the code and I was just like, went cross-eyed. But it'll basically break your app into pages, so that when they load this page, it only gets this chunk of your code. And Webpack is smart enough to detect, on page 1, they only need this. On page 2, they only need this. And if you're using React Router from my friend Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson, it just automatically breaks it down for you on pages. And they did that magical integration. Webpack will also do tree shaking for you. So like, for example, if you're including all of Lodash, it's going to go see, it's like, okay, well, you actually never call these methods anymore, so I'm not going to include them anymore. And so it'll just automatically cut down your trees, or your file size for you, which is really nice. Browserify can do it if you use Uglify. Uglify will do it. Otherwise, you can do it by hand using npm dedupe. And you can just, if you know things are like being included in multiple places, right? Like if there's 3 different packages that depend on Lodash, you can say npm dedupe Lodash, and it's going to pull it up and it will include ones. So just be aware of that. I think the newer version, the newer beta of npm does that automatically, but npm 2 does not. Just a quick side note here, this is actually another big problem with m.reddit.com. SVGs are really expensive. Because they're pretty complicated, right? Like there's a lot of paths and stuff like that going on there. So if you can help it, leave SVGs out of React and just include them separately as SVGs. That's not always possible, right? But as much as possible, I would say do it. When I say use sparingly, I just mean inside of React. Use SVGs everywhere because they're awesome. And that, like, now that I've talked your ear off for 40 minutes about like all these different performance hacks and cool things to do, just write the app first, right? Write the app first and then optimize. Like this is a lot of things that we get caught up on, that we want to like micro-optimize everything along the way. But for the most part, you're optimizing things that aren't really bottlenecks. Like write your app first, see what the bottlenecks are first, and then go back and optimize. Prefer readability where possible. Maintainable code is almost always better than a micro-optimized code. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say always better. And yeah, and then hack around the bottlenecks and then document your bottlenecks. Yeah, this makes for a happy developer. Any questions? So I have a whole other part on HTTP2. If you want to talk about HTTP2, you can talk to me. But basically, remember everything you know about like what I just said. Well, it's totally wrong now because basically everything I just said just goes out the window. It's coming. It's called Speedy right now, but whatever. But basically, things like serving assets from a different domain goes away because it leaves the connections open so it doesn't send the cookies every time. It uses compression inherently, and it multiplexes your assets. So whereas before, like we were serving images from a different domain, and we were trying to get them all into the smallest files possible, now you actually want to have many files so you can download many files all at the same time. It totally changes the game. Like things like spriting go away, concatenating files goes away, serving static assets from a different domain goes away, and minifying assets. These all like things that were helpful before are now actually hurting you. And when is it coming? Well, soon. I don't know. The answer is like all the browsers support it now, except Opera Mini and BlackBerry, but who cares? Yeah, even stock Android browser supports it, but yeah, that's weird because they don't support anything. And Firefox, Chrome, and Opera have it forever. IE11, Safari 8, which is basically everything recent supports Speedy, not HTTP2, but that's coming, and Speedy is more or less very similar. So that's like 80% of your global users and just about all current mobile users. So that was like a whirlwind tour of Speedy and /HTTP2. So if you have any questions about it, feel free to talk to me about it. I got like a minute for questions. So any questions? All right, everyone's just asleep. That's cool too. Glad you all got half time. Cool, well, thank you.